This is Doug DeAngelis from Musicians Council, and this is the Art to Income podcast. I'm here today with producer, engineer, and mixer of 10 Grammy award-winning projects. He's also been nominated for multi-Grammys himself. He's a publisher, strategic consultant for the music industry, and an all-around excellent brain in teaching people how to make money with their music. It's Reid Shippen. Hey, Reid.
Greetings. What's going on?
Thanks for being part of this. Thanks for being part of Musicians Council, and thanks for being part of this podcast. So your background is kind of fascinating. You came up really in the studio world, yeah, as an engineer producer.
Yeah, I came up old school, intern, assistant, engineer, mixer, producer, just the path that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, it's a difficult path now because everything's done at home, right? So. Yeah. You know, just to give the audience a little background on the kind of artists you've worked with, Death Cab for Cutie, Cage the Elephant, the Jonas Brothers. It's pretty diverse stuff. Ingrid Michaelson, so some deep indie world, Lady Antebellum, and a little big town countryside, right? So you're in Nashville. So, but you're in Nashville, but you're kind of doing projects outside of Nashville as well.
Yeah, I mean, Nashville's got a pretty diverse musical scene, especially now. I mean, it's become more and more diverse over the last 10 or 15 years. But, I mean, Nashville, the secret to Nashville is basically it's a magnet for writers. Mm-hmm. So it's not really genre specific, it's song specific. So that you get a lot of stuff going through here just because of that.
Interesting. Very cool. It's a really unique time that, growing up in the music industry myself, we kind of worked through it a long period of time when everything was curated, right? Labels curated everything. So we, even as listeners, we were told what we were going to listen to, what we were going to like. It was it was handed to you in the pace they wanted you to get it. And you were, you followed the trends of radio. I'm going back now to the 70s, 80s, even early 90s, pre-internet era.
Sure.
Now we live in a totally different world where not only is music self-curated, but artists are really self-curated. And, it's a time when obviously anybody can get their music up on Spotify now. We know they made some big shifts, and I want, maybe you can talk a little bit about the changes that have gone on in the streaming world, how they were working with labels, and now it's more open directly to artists. But it's a time when anybody can get their music out. The question is, what do you do with it once it's out, and how do you monetize it?
Yeah, well, I mean, to start at the beginning, I don't know that I necessarily agree with you that the major labels had actually curated anything. What they had done is control access. There wasn't access to this stuff, but the curation has always come from the music fans. You back in the 70s, yes, you were hearing stuff on the radio, but you were also making cassettes and mixtapes and passing stuff around and talking to your peers. And at least where I grew up, which was in the New York City area, a lot of music came peer-to-peer, just old school. And you're from New York too, right? So
yeah, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Connecticut. We were a little more limited,
Well, but you still had New York radio, right?
Yeah. But it was radio.
I remember taping stuff off the radio and and passing stuff around and so I don't know if it was about curation. I think it was just about access. We had two avenues for access, or three really, right? You had radio, you had the music store, which until Steve Jobs messed with it, it was album oriented, and you shows, the live scene.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, the curation aspect of it has become easier now. Now you can access just about anything, and you can contribute just about anything to all of your nearly instantly, or even weave it into the background of your experience in other mediums like Gram or Fortnite or what have you. So it's actually it's a super exciting time, in my opinion, for music diversity and creativity. It's just come up with another problems, one of which was monetization, which I think we're solving, albeit late, and the other one is signal to noise.
Yeah, and they're both huge issues right now. Signal to noise being, the I think the top of the list of issues is. So, maybe a good way to talk about this is there's a tremendous amount of really talented indie artists out there, people making their own records, people working independently with producers, and outputting their own music through all sorts of digital channels.
Yep.
I'd love to kind of gear this conversation towards them and towards managers who are working with artists like that. And let's assume they're artists that make great music. You know, we're not here to teach people how to make great music. We're here to teach people what to do with their music once they make it. Right. What kind of advice would you start with as building blocks for a manager or an artist? Music's ready to release, and to organize themselves for the best chance of capturing monetization.
I think you have to have a plan. I think as an artist, you have to sit down with your team, which would include your manager, I think, and make a plan for this. And maybe the first step of that plan is to say, as an artist, to your manager, you know, like, what ideas do you have? How can we do this? And if you get an answer that sounds anything like, well, that's not the way it's done, you should probably just get a new manager. Because there's still a lot of people who are like, well, that's not, no one does it that way, or that's not typical, or we've done it this way for 20 years. And I found that that's generally a precursor to failure. The inability to think outside of the box. You know, there's still a lot of people out there that's like, okay, we'll go and make your record, and we'll get you a publishing deal, and we'll, and then we'll get you a record deal, and then you can get tour support. You can go on tour with the big artists. And it's like, you know, I mean, that still happens, but that's not the point anymore. That's not how most of it is going to happen. And then the other thing I think that you have to do before you even jump onto this train is you have to manage expectations. Nobody actually said that being a musician meant being a rock star, meant being a multimillionaire. You know, I think the expectation that music leads to fame and fortune is kind of ludicrous. You know, if you're in music for fame and fortune, I would suggest that you go into like finance. I mean, it's going to be a lot easier to make a couple of $1 million a year working for Goldman Sachs than it is to make music. So once you manage that expectation, you have to say, well, you know, what am I doing music for in the first place? And if you're not doing it because you have to do it because you need to make the art, my guess is that you're probably going to fail, because there's too many other people out there who are doing it because they have to do it. And if you're competing against someone who is bleeding out of the eyes to make this happen, they are always going to outlast you.
Interesting.
You know, they're always going to outwork you. So a lot of times we start with the really great essay that is it Kevin Kelly from Wired wrote called 1,000 True Fans.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the new Bible for the indie music. Well, I mean, honestly, that's the new Bible for the gig culture, period.
Yeah.
You know, it applies to things other than music, but when we talk to musicians or we talk to our students, you know, I co-teach a little class with a friend of mine that we call a minor in reality. It's about music disruption and you know, startups and free thinking, and, you know, just kind of jumping into the real music business as it exists instead of the way it still is taught in school or in the textbooks that the schools have. You know, we tell the students, like, that's the key, is finding 1,000 true fans. And if you can do that, you can make a decent living doing music, which is kind of the point, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I'm sure we'd all love to be rock stars and have like oodles of cash, but you know, the success rate of being a rock star, if you look at the statistics, is way smaller than the success rate of opening a restaurant, and the success rate of opening a restaurant is like 1%. So,
well, look, I also think that the definition of becoming a rock star or in any kind of star is radically changed right now. I mean, we live in I have a 10-year-old son. We live in a time where young people, who are what I focus on constantly in my businesses and in my, you know, as my sort of compasses for the direction of things, they're totally different than we were growing up. They're not going to spend 9 hours a day learning how to play an instrument and, you know, bleeding at the fingertips and focused on how do I match that person's this and how do they come in a world of anybody can become famous overnight. whether that be true or not, or what the longevity of that is, those are different questions. But in their perception, they see things explode overnight in their mediums of entertainment. And so they just strive for that. They just think, I can make a YouTube channel and have 200,000 followers if I just do it cool. And they just go for it. They have a total mindset. They go for it.
And you know what? My advice to them would be like, absolutely go for it. You know, Andy Warhol back in the day said, in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. I think it's maybe everyone will be famous for 15 seconds now. But, you know, having a YouTube channel that hits 200,000 subscribers and then disappears 3 months later isn't a career.
No,
it isn't long term. It's not success. So, you know, I mean, if you want to go for that, that's great. Just make sure that you're working at Starbucks because they have healthcare.
Of course. It leads me to my point, though. How do we get them? You know, how do we understand that mindset, realize that that is how kids are learning, and also help guide them beyond that to see that that isn't a career, but that's just, at the same time, there is validity to it. And if you're close to it and you start to see, wow, some of these people really do launch from there, and then they start doing terrestrial things, and, you know, they almost go backwards. Now you've got companies like Disney taking shows and Nickelodeon taking shows off YouTube and putting them onto television. If that's not the tail wagging the dog, there's no tail wagging any dog at this point, you know, but it's how it's working now. And so we're just going through a cultural change, you know? But I think it is important then to look at it and say, okay, we realize that this is, you know, possible now, and sitting down with your manager and doing the things you talked about. But it's there's so many monetization streams out there. There's so many, and they're all very small now. There's a lot, you know, I look at it as like marbles. And, you know, if you can have a ton of marbles, you got a good pot of marbles. But it's a lot of marbles. There's not those big paying revenue streams like there used to be in the industry. So to me, it's kind of like, you know, driving through the fog. And so what I want to talk about is, you know, how do we kind of teach kids where the fog lights are and how to kind of see through that stuff? What should they focus on first? Like, what's right in front of them on the road to start with, to be able to start hitting those revenue streams and start capturing them, and then they can grow from there? What are the most critical first ones?
Well, from altitude, and I know this is probably going to make creative people's eyes cross, but there's actually a formula for success. You know how everyone says there's no formula for success? There actually is. And it's S equals QR. Have you seen this formula?
No.
Okay, so S is success. Q is the ability for someone to execute on an idea, and R is the idea. And the point of the formula is, you can have the best idea in the world, and if you don't execute on it, if you can't execute on it, you're not going to see success. Conversely, you can be someone who's super, super good at execution, at working really hard. And if your idea, or in our case, your song or your music, isn't very good, it doesn't matter how hard you work. So the reality of the situation is, as access becomes easier to all kinds of art, the onus comes back to the creator on being not only creating really great music, you know, which you have to do, but on being someone who can then take that music and really execute on it, you know, really work hard. And the people that I see being successful in this industry are usually the ones whose overnight success is like 10 years in the making. Or as we tell songwriters, you know, if you want to be a good songwriter, write 10,000 songs, throw them out, and then start writing. You know, I think one of the problems that we're running into is everybody sees people being successful and they figure, well, this is pretty easy. And guess what? It really isn't. You know, it just isn't. And anyone can do this. And guess what? They really can't. And I'll give a slightly embarrassing story. Until this weekend, I had pretty much written off Post Malone as a complete bozo, right? Because, I mean, not only does he look like an idiot, let's face it, but all of his music so far is this middle-of-the-road, pop kind of hip-hop, auto-tuned garbage that, you know, you can sit there and listen to it and say, okay, well, I mean, anybody can do that because it's just auto-tune. And then he went and played the Grammys with an acoustic guitar and murdered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I relearned a lesson that I've learned over and over again and I should have paid attention to, which is, dude's really talented. He's just identifying a niche where he works the best. But the secondary lesson to that is dude's really talented. Like, he can pick up a guitar and kill it. He chose not to, while Ed Sheeran chose to go do an arena tour with a guitar and a looper pedal. You know, to do either of those things, you have to be really talented. If you're not really talented, you're not going to make it. You know, I
Yeah.
don't care how much technology there is. There's always going to be somebody better. You know, so you really have to hone your craft. You have to learn how to write great songs, and then you have to learn how to make great songs, and then you have to learn how to promote great songs. A lot of the tools are out there, but what it really comes down to is hard work.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I guess that's what I was talking about before with my YouTube analogy is, you know, we have a young generation coming up that sees that and that ability or what they perceive as instant success, but doesn't know all of the X factors behind it, why they're likable, what makes them likable, what makes them cut through the signal to noise, which is a good topic to roll into because those people do cut through it, even if it's in weird little 5 seconds of fame kind of things. I mean, in that noise, there's way more people that don't cut through any of it than the few that cut through it. And then those that cut through it, what's really behind it and where can it go?
Sure.
And like you said, it takes a ton of hard work.
Yeah.
That said, is it the starting point? I mean, do you think for young artists, the video channels, the basic tools out there are the starting point for them? Is that the jumping off platform? Try to get your talent showcased on those mainstream internet platforms and push from there, or is it a more traditional route?
I think probably it's both. I think if you want to be successful, and I wish I had a case study that I could roll out. I wish we could see how Post Malone did it, because I honestly don't know. But my guess would be that he's been working hard on this for a long time. And whether that means he started at 15 and was successful 10 years later, I don't know. My guess is he probably didn't start learning how to play an instrument a year and a half ago. My guess is that people like that ended up pushing their way into situations that could benefit them, whether that means hanging out with other bands or getting into job opportunities or even internships that gives them access to stuff, and going home at night and not playing video games and not going out and partying, but sitting there and writing and learning how to play an instrument, like kind of continually hammering on it. It's kind of always been the recipe for success, right? It's the nice thing is now there's a lot more places you can put your stuff. So you get a lot more chances to access people, which is super exciting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is it's kind of all backwards from the way it used to be. It used to be you built all these fundamental skills and then you ultimately polished it all into a video, right?
Yeah.
But you spent years cultivating all these fundamental skills, making a record, getting your business in order, getting signed, and all this stuff, ultimately to make a video that was this very short, overly polished, supersonic thing that probably didn't even really look like the real people in real life at all, but it's what the world saw. Now, the world starts with a, 2-minute video of who you are, and ultimately you're sort of tasked to follow through then with all of the goods,
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing,
It is. It's fascinating that opportunities can come along now that weren't accessible. A perfect example is a friend of mine. His name is Devin Dawson, and he's a really successful young artist in Nashville. And I guess you would call him a country artist because he signed to a country label, but if you listen to his music, it's not really country. And it's not folk, and it's not Americana. It's pop and rock and storytelling, and it's really interesting stuff. But he came to be known to people when he and a friend of his, who was a girl, and I forget her name, I'm sorry, they made a video of a mashup of 2 Taylor Swift songs, and it was the two of them out, 10 minutes south of my studio out in a field somewhere, and they made this video, and Taylor saw it and really loved it and retweeted it, and boom, now everyone's interested.
Yep.
So everyone would say, well, that's really lucky, like that's a lucky shot. But he was ready for that luck because he had spent 10 years playing in punk bands, working on songwriting, working on like everything that he wanted to do. So when the opportunity came available, he was able to step into it and say, yeah, I've got 40 songs. Let's talk about a publishing deal. Cool. This is the guy I want to work with, and I actually ended up introducing him to the guy that would end up producing his records, a guy named Jay Joyce, and they made a really great record. And a record label said, wow, we want to put this out. And, there they go. So did it all come from a Taylor Swift cover video? Maybe. Or did it come from 10 years of work getting ready and the opportunity that a Taylor Swift cover video afforded them?
Yep, it's a great lesson. And there's also a lot of cleverness that went into the idea to do what they did, which is an extension of that talent in that time,
Right.
It's coming up with the clever idea that pushed the button of that artist and ultimately led to that moment. That doesn't just come out of nowhere either,
No, it doesn't. And that's that gets back to the success equals Q times R formula, right? Like
exactly.
You got to work it. So
it's the Q.
I remember we went to the Museum of Modern Art and they had these 2 throw pillows that you could buy for your house. And one of them says, that's not art. I could have done that. And the other one says, but you didn't.
Right.
And that's kind of the key, right?
It sure is. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really a modern manager's job to start to really open their eyes and see all that and, start to study all of that sort of X factor stuff that can raise eyebrows. There are patterns of things that raise eyebrows in every era of pop culture,
Sure.
And people find funny or interesting and clever or whatever it is that makes them want to share it with friends. And I think, there's great advice here to getting an artist off the ground on, support their talent, drive them to be as talented and as complete as an artist as they can be. So when they get there, they have it to deliver, like Post Malone on the Grammys.
Yep.
But also really have your eyes open for how to break those little opportunities into big opportunities.
Yeah. If I were a manager right now, if I were working at Red Light or whatever, what I would be doing is making best friends with the people at EA or the people at Fortnite. Because what Marshmello did, where he had that concert inside of Fortnite, they've been trying to do that for 10 years. And they finally pulled it off. And one of the reasons why they pulled it off is not just because it's a huge platform, but because the way they set it up was when you were in there, you felt like you were in a room with 60 people at an intimate show, and the people were amped to be there. Now, there were millions of people watching that show, but it felt like you were in a room with 60, right?
Right.
So my guess is within a year, you're going to see AC Entertainment, right? And Bonnaroo and whatever inside of the most popular video games where people can run around and they can kill each other, or they can go over here and listen to a tune. Whoever grabs that is going to have access to an audience of millions and millions of people. Whoever brands it correctly and actually, kind of gets in on that is going to rule. And that's going to be a conduit for all kinds of ways to introduce an artist. I mean, show me a cheaper way to introduce an artist to millions of captive audience members.
Yeah.
I
agree.
So if I were a manager, I would be like out there working that right now and thinking about stuff like that. And as AR and VR unfolds in our lives, there's going to be more and more opportunities to do that, because it's active. Like people are actually immersed there. They're not just cruising YouTube.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been putting a lot of time in the last couple of years into understanding the video game world and how it monetizes its art and applying it to our craft and taking that right to the core of our craft, which is the production. Because ultimately, what you're talking about is using games as a platform, as just a visibility platform. But there's something the reason gaming is where it is that they've worked and they've constantly updated and changed the platform to be able to engage people in experiences like that. The record platform right now, okay, so recorded music as it is right now does not offer the ability in your headphones to just suck in another, you know, form of art entirely and run it alongside it so you can see it with 60 people. But the video platform does, because the sophistication and the years of development and the years of changing and growing as an industry have led them to this insanely multi-layered experience that they're able to do so many things in media right now and launch you know, almost anything they want to do. And they're, you know, the financial end is behind it, following it. So it's a really fascinating time to really look at that industry and see what we can do as an industry to be part of it, like what's happening with Marshmallow, or, you know, start to learn from it in a more fundamental way of how can we expand what we do to be able to reach more people and have a richer experience, like you're talking about with AR and VR and things like that. And I think we're going to see a lot of that come into play too, you know, in the year.
And a richer and a more personalized experience. You know, I don't play video games, but I fully expect that if I did, it would look at my playlist over the last couple of weeks, and when I was in there playing, it would be playing Run the Jewels and Foo Fighters, because that's what I've been cranking in the car, you know, which is great because there's two people next to me and the guy next to me is listening to Post Malone, and the girl over there is listening to Ariana Grande, or she's listening like whatever. And it's all of a sudden now that there's millions and millions of opportunities to connect on a very personal level with people. Whereas before, you know, we were waiting in line at the record store to get the new Beastie Boys record, you know, and there's an excitement to that, and there's kind of a personal connection, but it's not as visceral as this stuff is.
Agree.